Welcome to the webinar, Driving Value Through Bioinformatics. My name is Cole McCullum, analyst here at Lux Research, and I will be moderating today's session. Our speaker today will be Josh Haslen. Throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the questions box on your screen. Time permitting, we will answer all of the questions that we can. If your question does not get answered, please do not hesitate to email it to questions@luxresearchinc.com and we will respond. At this point, I would like to introduce Lux Research's Josh Haslen.
Thanks for the introduction, Cole, and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning into our webinar today, Driving Value Through Bioinformatics. And as we move through this, I want you to remember two key tenets. The first is minimizing risk, and the second is identifying links across agrifood. So keep those in the back of your mind. We're going to try to pull those through the entire presentation as we move through. And our agenda today is threefold. What I want to do is start out with bioinformatics, thinking of it as this growth industry, but as an industry that's been around for quite some time, and get at the answer of why now. From there, we're going to move into the reality of bioinformatics and actually applying it. And what I want to build for you is a way to think about how to engage in this space through understanding the offerings and requirements of bioinformatics. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some future opportunities through what I call crossing over opportunities. And these may very well be very lucrative. So, hang in there, stay to the end, and we'll get to those for you. With that, let's start with discussing this growth industry and addressing why now. And so I think this really starts with the biological data revolution. And as our data grows, right, there's just more of a need for digital tools. And if we look at genomic data in general, what we see is that's doubling every 10 months. And, to put that in perspective, right, that's like our global population, which is a challenge on its own, going from 8 billion to 16 billion next year. And so you can get an idea when you think about it that way of just how quickly the amount of data available is growing. Secondly, it's really important to recognize that commercially available products have caught up with those developed through academic means. And even more so, and adding to this, is the idea that innovations from bioinformatics citations are also growing rapidly at a 5-year CAGR of 15%. And now if we add on one other thing to this, and specific to the opportunities in agri-food, it's that consumer and policy trends are really coming to a head, and that's resulting in key investments. And so just in the last 2 years, we've seen $1 billion in investment for companies that apply bioinformatics as a key tenet of their business. And so what does all this look like? And this looks like a rapid growing industry from 2013 to 2023 of 3 billion to 20 billion. And with that, right, a 15% CAGR, and it doesn't matter what market research you look at. All the lines on the graph here are many different market strategies, market research evaluations, and they all show the same thing, right? This same growth. So this is a rapidly growing industry, and we can understand better this industry by looking a little bit at the industry that's driving it, and that is that trillion-dollar pharma industry. And it's not even just about the fact that investments are going in. Our research resources are also being pooled into this around bioinformatics, and 70% of those research resources really tie to human health. And so what I want to do now is take a step back and look at this long-standing relationship and use it to elucidate that opportunity in agri-food a little bit better. And so to start, let's just think about pharma in general and look at the R&D expenditures. And if we do that, we see that most major companies have about 20% of their revenue allocated to R&D. And looking a little deeper, what we see is that for every single therapeutic, the median amount invested is 1 billion. And this can be as high as 4 billion, maybe as low as 200 million, but we're talking about a lot of money invested, and it's really moving into this investment funnel in 3 stages. We have that discovery and preclinical stage, maybe 45% in general. Stage 2, phase trials, another 50%, and really submission to launch is kind of a paltry 5%, which still accounts for a bunch here. But the key thing is that bioinformatics plays a key role, right, in stage 1, discovery and preclinical trials, and also for stage 2, you think about how bioinformatics can aid in identifying individuals that might fit the parameters for a particular phase trial. So it really can minimize risk throughout this. And a recent study, I think, presents this very well. And that is by removing failed trials alone, and bioinformatics can do this through risk reduction, you can reduce that investment from 1 billion down to 400 million. So that's over 50% savings for that. And so if you just consider the value there for bioinformatics, it's really shrinking that funnel. And especially in a time where innovation might have to become more lean, we're really talking about a tool that can be extremely valuable and in itself has perceived value without even thinking about the added benefits to creating new products. And so let's pull this idea through to the agri-food and health industry. Let's start with crop protection. If we think about this $85 billion industry, we can also think about the R&D expenditures here, averaged overall about 10%. So that brings that value down to 8.5 billion. And if we then take that roughly 50% where bioinformatics really matters in that investment value chain there, we bring that down to 4 billion. And now if we say, well, bioinformatics can save us 50% of that, that is roughly $2 billion. And so that's in savings across the industry. That itself, right, is a pretty good industry alone. And if we pull that through to, let's say, animal health, now we add another billion. We can pull it through to functional ingredients, another 2 billion. You could pull this through as many industries you want. And I think what you get here is that the inherent value of bioinformatics is potentially huge. And that builds on what was already displayed for the industry just in the revenue that it's able to generate. And so, how I would summarize this is really bioinformatics helps stop the bleeding. And that's key for all of us. But the thing to also take away is that really to win, you need to remain grounded in what bioinformatics offers and what it requires, right? This is not a silver bullet. I never want to call bioinformatics a silver bullet. It is a digital tool, and I'll kind of continue to pull it through as such. So what I want to do next is pull you through to the reality of applying bioinformatics. And again, build a little thematic framework for you to consider how to judge some of these offerings and requirements that are really make bioinformatics successful. And then you can use this as an evaluation tool, and we'll pull that through for an example. So when I describe bioinformatics to anyone, I like this figure, and I like that it pulls through the idea that it's the digital linchpin of the omics value chain. It really is. It sits just after you're producing data and just before you're doing something with it. So it's a really key tenet of moving data through to value. And to understand that, though, again, I want to keep pushing this idea of really and try to understand what these pipelines offer, but also what they require. And so let's start with what they offer. And so if I look at the basic schematic here for bioinformatics, it's full of these different components kind of moving iteratively. It's a little confusing overall, and I actually like to break it down a little further into more manageable chunks. The first of which I think is data acquisition and management, so this top area, and then transitioning down and through processing and transformation, followed by analysis and interpretation. And so what I want to do now is go through each of these and talk about what really makes them successful for an offering of a bioinformatics platform. And let's start with data acquisition and management. This is often undervalued, in my opinion, and I can't necessarily say why, but when you look at what it can offer you, I think the first thing is effective collaboration. You think about a data set and a data structure and how you share a lot of different disparate data sources, having a solid management acquisition and dissemination system is crucial to being successful with bioinformatics. Secondly, as you do that, I think the thing that should come out from that is that you'll establish standardization, and that will really enable multi-omics discovery in the future. And I think that's where a lot of this is going. And so if you're not prepared for that, I think the best you'll find is that you'll be behind your competitors. And then lastly, by having these solid management systems for your data, you can maybe also establish linkages between data sources outside of the biological realm and begin to be able to utilize some of your external data and tie that in order to get even newer, more interesting results. For data processing and transformation, this is about speed, 100% speed. These are the high throughput pipelines that are going to facilitate your common needs, whether it's understanding mutation or many other things out there. The thing where some I think are able to differentiate themselves if necessary is by taking extensive background data and improving confidence and reproducibility of that standardization process as you move to analysis. So that's something to take into account. It's important as we think of all of the different trials being established out there. And so having these standardized practices that work across very different types of data sets, it's important to consider. And then lastly, and this is really specific to, I think, agri-food and really important to agri-food, is your data analysis interpretation. Those sexy network diagrams that you've always seen, and I think every bioinformatics platform tries to push, if they are not able to provide a linkage between high-level observations, those phenotypes, metadata, and to those smaller scale things that provide that biological causality, the proteomics, the genomics, et cetera, transcriptomics, avoid it. Avoid it at all costs, because it's not going to be able to do is help you create products. It can do some discovery, but anything more than that is going to be quite difficult. So from here, that's really how to create success through these offerings. But it's also really important to think about, well, what do I need to make this offering also valuable? And that's everything else in the diagram here. So on the left side, we have what I would deem is most important is upstream data for the target population. Second is integration with your existing workflows and your existing data. I touched on that through data management, but I think it's also important as it moves outside of that actual management platform. And then lastly, application of those results at the bench and beyond. And this is something I think that's often, again, not perceived as important, but as I said before, bioinformatics is not the silver bullet. It's still going to require a lot more effort. And so let's look at upstream data for a target population. When we think about what it is to apply bioinformatics, which again, are these digital tools, digital algorithms that allow you to learn more about very large data sets, right? If we look at what's happened in, let's say, machine vision currently, and our ability to train machine vision software to understand somebody's face for facial recognition and all the errors associated with that, those all revolve around choosing poorly representative data. And the same goes for these algorithms. So as you develop algorithms or work with others to develop algorithms, make sure that you're teaching those in a way that allows you to address your particular population of interest. And that means either you need to come in with data or other partners need to come in with data as well. And to that effect, right, value your data. Value also your ability to generate data. These are both strengths, and as the bioinformatics industry develops, this is a key area where you can bring something to the table in a new and novel way and enable bioinformatics to demonstrate its value. On the integration with your existing workflows and data, this is again about, yes, it's great to have some digital tools to understand data, but if they're not directly tied to your workflow, they're just not going to be as valuable. It's going to take time away from moving things through that workflow. So really focus on platforms that work with the way you do your research, and hopefully you find a partner that knows how to engage with your style of working as well. And to that effect, hopefully another part of this is that they can integrate the other types of data you might have available, or talk with you about how you can integrate those data sources into these types of pipelines. And so lastly, as far as application of results go at the bench and beyond, bioinformatics, again, not a silver bullet. It's going to take experts no matter what at this point. We should not be confident in the algorithms that are created for every population, and therefore what you need are experts who can look at that data, understand it, and evaluate them so that you can then push through to the bench and beyond. And therefore, whereas bioinformatics, the platforms themselves may not be that expensive, it's still going to take capital investment in talented research teams to make them effective. And so what I want to do now is take this framework and apply it to some opportunities that are out there. And what I want to start out with is saying that there are lots of examples of this happening today. And some of the examples I think are pretty interesting and recent is, first and foremost, Corteva and PepsiCo working with academics to really spearhead sequencing of the oat genome. And this is key for that industry to move forward and develop novel varieties in the future. In addition, I brought up how commercialization and academic realm are really catching up now to where we see the academic sector leveraging these commercial tools. And Genentech has helped scientists identify microbial interactions that affect disease suppression in plants, moving towards productization in that case. And then lastly, we have a company, Brightseed, that leverages sort of a functional ingredient approach using bioinformatics. And now we see them developing a partnership announcement with Genome. So, there's a lot going on here. And so if you think that, now's not the time to act, you can wait. Again, now is the time to act. And the example I want to pull forward today is more traditional bioinformatics example. I think it plays well here. And that is Cargill and Eagle Genomics. And so what they're targeting is this reduction of dependence on antibiotics. And this is a soaring area for the animal health industry and as well as animal welfare. And what they're hoping to do is find value in the data that they have existing so that their newly established health technologies unit can benefit and bring new products to market without having to go out and, let's say, purchase others. And what they've done then is establish this multi-year partnership. And the goal here is to leverage metagenomic analysis to understand how microbiome will affect these health outcomes. And so let's walk through our sort of thematic progression here to understand really what these bioinformatic offerings can provide. And so when we think about Eagle Genomics, we can start with data acquisition and management. And as I said before, I think this is often very undervalued, but Eagle Genomics does this well. They have several different pieces of their digital infrastructure that are specifically geared towards data acquisition and management, organizing that data in a way that it's standardized and that also allows you to generate new hypotheses, identify relationships with, let's say, publicly available data. So a lot going on here. So I think that is a very important area of development. On the data processing and transformation side, Eagle Genomics does as well as any other company here. Lots of different tools, and those tools are valuable, viable, but not a differentiator, in my opinion. On the data analysis and interpretation side, I do think here is where Eagle Genomics provides some extra value to Cargill, and that Eagle Genomics itself is very focused on metagenomics. And so the specific analyses that they've pulled through, developed, are going to be extremely valuable, and paired with data acquisition and management should prove quite valuable on the offering side. But what about the requirements here? So when we think about data, I consider this a check mark here because I think Cargill indeed does have the upstream data and is looking for a better way to analyze that. So I would put a checkbox here. As far as integrating with existing workflows and data, again, I think Eagle Genomics does this well. They are looking to look at colleagues, clients' workflow and use their e-scientists to work through that and help them use their data more efficiently. So I think there's another check there. And then lastly, application of results at the bench and beyond, this is where the question mark is. And I think it's an evident question mark just because it's going to be up to the Cargill team to take what they know, what they're able to learn, I should say, from Eagle Genomics tools and make decisions about those. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I think this is where a lot of individuals are going to find themselves, but I think this also goes to show a really important conclusion here, and that is, platforms don't need to have it all to be successful. And so if you're out there looking for the perfect solution, I guarantee you should expect to fall behind. Instead, get out there, interact with companies that fit most of those boxes, right? Check most of those boxes. And then I think what you can expect is that you can be that next bioinformatics partnership that raises eyebrows. And pardon me while I grab a drink here. But there's the next partnership right there, dry mouth for all of us presenting on webinars abroad. So, think about these different opportunities. And I think today and now is the time to act. But, that's now and that's today. What about the future? And so what I want to talk about now is capturing value by crossing over for these, what I would consider much more lucrative opportunities. And what do I mean by crossing over? Well, what I mean is about helping yourself by taking what others have done in other industries and advancing those so that you can bring them into your industry. So some examples include repurposing active ingredients, right? Many don't know necessarily what their active ingredient could mean for another industry. So through bioinformatics, it's possible to do something like this. What about for validated discovery platforms used in pharma industry? Well, those are looking at chemistry, tying that to biology. So why not use those that have been validated for the agri-food industry? The same, I think, goes for accumulated and centralized expertise. We can look at all of the expertise that's been developed at our bioinformatic institutes worldwide. And I'll talk a little more about this, but when you think about all the different data, a lot of those institutes take in, they are very good at omics. So you can really leverage a lot of these different methods to think about crossover opportunities. And what I'm going to talk about today are two strategies to engage. The first will be joint venturing. The second will be thinking about more of an open innovation concept. So when we think about joint venturing, what I really mean is, reducing risk and leveraging strengths. And this doesn't come without obstacles. When you think about, let's say, the pharma industry, this trillion-dollar beast of an industry, to be honest, right? We're talking about, how can you identify some of those companies, but find the ones that have resources available? Now, this can prove difficult, but I think it's not without reward. And the same goes for finding chemistries or tools capable of crossing barriers. We've seen this happen recently. And so while it is an obstacle and you may have to jump on these quickly, it's possible. And I would point towards the collaboration and joint venture between Arvinas and Bayer, that's now Earth Bio. So, those types of scenarios are going to continue to emerge. And I think more and more what we're seeing is what's developed in another industry indeed can be passed on to other industries. And as the tools and digital tools develop to exploit that, we're seeing more chances. But I think it's important to also note that you should expect some initial investment here. For Earth Bio, for instance, we're talking about 100 million investment to really push that forward. And so if you want to catch something early and push it to the finish line quickly, you will need that initial investment. So for those potential partners you seek, it's also going to be important to satisfy that risk to reward ratio. So not necessarily easy, but I think that this is possible. And I think what you're going to find is that there's going to be more and more instances of this occurring. And that is extending those bioinformatic resources and expert capabilities from industries that have already developed them to yours. And that will really get you at the forefront of agri-food innovation. And the example that I would bring up here is Cyclica. So Cyclica is a company that has developed a discovery platform, and it has some generative chemistry in there. So they're doing quite a bit more than just bioinformatics. But initially, they were about licensing and consulting, just like all other bioinformatics companies, really. But what we saw them do in the last year or two is change that model to a really developed a focused joint venture effort business model. And I think it has two main advantages. The first is decentralized collaboration. So by having these targeted approaches and focusing on really targeted applications, they can work from their office through this digital tool, but help others use that digital tool more effectively, and also focus on the applications where they think they have the best chance of succeeding. And we've already seen some success for this company. Now they have roughly 5 or 6 different joint ventures established in pharma, but they've also now begun to move beyond pharma. And then just recently, they've actually engaged with FMC and are looking to help establish their discovery platform a little bit more. Interestingly, the side note is that they're taking a different approach with FMC, and it's not a joint venture. But why I think this is the case is that FMC likely didn't bring a targeted application for them to really build off of. So for them, right, the idea of creating the joint venture was a bit too up in the air. So when you think about this joint venture model, also really consider this targeted application approach. And if you have that, I think that's where this really takes off. On the open innovation side, what I mean here is accessing more low-cost experts and tools, and doing that by engaging with the institution networks around the world, okay? And yeah, there are some challenges here. I think the first one is that a lot of the existing corporate programs at these are often dominated by pharma players. And while that, is either intimidating or maybe uses up some of the resources at these institutes, there are many instances of agri-food players getting into the mix and helping to push their interests forward too. So I would say, everybody should be out there trying to look for this expertise, especially if you're interested in the omics space. To do this, you will likely need to bring some data to the table. Okay, so this is another moment, I think, where your data can be leveraged in a really positive way. And by getting into this open innovation space, you can likely push your innovations forward and also push a lot of your interests forward. And so lots of partners out there, I think, whether it's Joint Genome Institute, EMBL, et cetera, lots of institutes in your region. So reach out to them. I would really consider that. And, the important thing to remember is that, again, bioinformatics is not necessarily a new industry. It's been around for a long time. And these institutes have been the key players to work on different ways to organize data, right? Structure data, think about lots of disparate data sources. And so if you're interested in also this omics approach or multi-omics approach, this is a really good resource that may also be quite cost effective. And the example that I would bring up here is Brightseed. I brought them up before, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about them now. So Brightseed provides a database with phytonutrient activity as well as identification of those chemicals, and then ties that to phytonutrient sources. And so that's really interesting for the functional ingredient space. The one thing they didn't do well initially was create a linkage to the health outcomes as well as to some of the functional attributes of a plant that is producing these. And so in order to do this better, they reached out through some colleagues to Joint Genome Institute and looked to optimize how they integrated large-scale omics data. And the interesting thing was that the JGI had been doing some innovation in bioinformatics tools and had developed this MAGI platform that allowed you to directly link sequences, so that genetic structure, to the biochemical functions, those metabolites. And that's exactly really what Brightseed was interested in. And so it helped them make their platform more efficient, but it also helped them to identify some knowledge gaps they had, right? I brought up data and how your algorithms are only as good as the data you have. So if you did have gaps, right, it's important that you fill those so that your system works that much better. And that was an added benefit of this program that I don't think was planned initially, but we saw come to light as this developed. And now, of course, I brought up the fact that Brightseed and Genome have partnered. So that really shows the benefits of working in this particular open innovation way. And so, at this point, what I want to do is leave you with 3 key takeaways. The first one is don't reinvent the wheel. I hope the one thing you got throughout this is that there are a ton of innovative tools out there and innovative players, and that you can take your value propositions within bioinformatics and really base them on that structure I laid out and say, here's how we can now engage. So go out there and find those opportunities. A second, be aware of these crossover applications. Again, I think they're going to continue to emerge. Another one that comes to mind is XChem getting into the agriculture realm through ENCO. We'll see that DNA libraries move into that space, and obviously bioinformatics is a key to knowing what's in those DNA libraries. Lastly, leverage bioinformatics to link unconnected data sources. I think this is an emerging field, and we're going to continue to see it emerge. And I think Brightseed really points to some different ways to think about bringing some other types of data sources into bioinformatics and then utilizing their linkage to biological causality to really generate some value. And so with that, I want to say thank you, and I appreciate you listening in.
Thanks, Josh. We will now be taking questions that you may have on the presentation, which you can type into the questions box. Again, if we do not get to your question on this call, someone from Lux will be in touch after the webinar. So, Josh, we have some questions coming in. To kick things off, you talked about a lot of potential for bioinformatics, a lot of different opportunities. If you had to narrow down, if you had to pick, what some of the best opportunities that are arising are, what would you say those are across the agri-food value chain?
Yeah, so I think, again, as I brought up in the webinar, the big piece here is really you need to consider your position first. Let's say you have some some bioinformatics capabilities that are solid. In that case, I think you should be looking for players that have data that they're looking to mine and value and do something with. So something like what we saw with Cargill there is really interesting. If instead, you're looking for, let's say, that new next ingredient out there, I really like what's happening in the functional ingredient space where, there are players out there with sort of these all-in-one capabilities. So I think Brightseed takes it all the way to the bench. And then, as a company, you can work with them in order to push that the final length to get it to the market right away. So I think, those are two of the most attractive areas. I do think for crossover opportunities, we're likely to see many more entering the agriculture space, especially as the need for novel pest control measures continues to evolve. And so, whether it's bio-based, whether it's synthetic, that doesn't necessarily matter. It's really about having more tools to get the job done well there. So those are the three opportunities I think I would point to.
Great, thanks. Another one we have here is, we talk about informatics in a lot of different contexts, chem informatics, materials informatics. Are there examples of organizations connecting different informatics disciplines to bioinformatics?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think, you're going to find a lot of that, excuse me, in two areas. The first is on the, in pharma. I think we see, a lot of chem informatics and physics-based approaches to understanding molecular interactions, right? We see that targeting or being included with bioinformatics, so more of understanding the genome, proteome, and then taking that information, right, and linking the two. So that's the first, I think, most common approach there. But I think what we're also seeing now is a lot of information on, like Brightseed is doing, on sources of different molecules and chemistries, right? And then, that type of information can also be linked then to bioinformatics. And so, as everybody's out there and thinking about the feedstocks they have and other opportunities to monetize those feedstocks, think about these types of solutions that then, say, well, we can understand what types of molecules are in this particular feedstock. And then, how can we then link those to some kind of biological opportunity or some other industry? Well, I think bioinformatics really does offer that opportunity. So whether, they have more of an all-in-one feature, something like Brightseed, or whether or not there's pieces and maybe you are the one with the bioinformatic capabilities, that's a way to really think about engaging and pushing maybe some of your waste streams further than they're currently being pushed today.
Great, thanks. Well, I think that is about all the time that we have for today. So thank you very much, Josh.
Wonderful.
And that will conclude our webinar for today. So the slide presentation and recording from this webinar will be sent to all attendees via email today. After leaving the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation. We would appreciate any feedback you may have to help inform and improve future webinars. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.